Have you ever truly considered that the fight for racial equality in America didn't simply end with the Civil Rights Movement?
Yeah.
That perhaps it just fundamentally changed forms? Today, we're going to explore a really radical, incredibly powerful idea. It's from a seminal book. And it argues that racial caste in America isn't dead. It's just been, well, redesigned. We're taking a deep dive into Michelle Alexander's groundbreaking book, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. It came out in 2010. And this isn't just, a bestseller. It's serious legal scholarship and passionate social justice advocacy, too. It really meticulously analyzes America's criminal justice system, challenges a lot of what we think we know.
Yeah, it really does. And Alexander's central argument, it just hits you. It's powerful. She basically contends that mass incarceration in the United States, it functions as a contemporary system of racial control. And it's, in her words, stunningly comprehensive and well-disguised.
Yeah.
She puts it so bluntly, it's become this iconic line. We have not ended racial caste in America. We have merely redesigned it.
Wow. That is a challenging idea, almost unsettling, isn't it? Especially if you believe in that arc of progress we always talk about. And just so you know, you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation right now. This is powered by Google's NotebookLM, really aimed at giving you deeper, more dynamic book analysis. So our mission for you over the next few minutes is this. We'll unpack how Alexander traces this pattern, from the very beginnings of the war on drugs right through to its lasting, devastating impact, revealing why she calls it, so aptly, the new Jim Crow. Yeah. Okay, so to really get the weight of her argument, it kind of helps to understand Alexander's own journey, right? What was her personal starting point? How did she arrive at this profound conclusion?
Well, what's fascinating, really, is that Alexander herself wasn't, immediately on board with this idea. She's very open about her journey. From skepticism to conviction, she talks about first seeing the idea that the drug war was a new Jim Crow on this bright orange poster in Oakland, and her first reaction that it sounded like, an overstatement.
An exaggeration.
Right, maybe too provocative. Exactly. But she's a civil rights lawyer, a scholar. And her rigorous research, all her legal experience, talking directly to people caught in the system, it forced her to confront the evidence. Slowly, maybe reluctantly at first, it pulled her towards this powerful and ultimately unavoidable conclusion. It really highlights how deep these systems run, that even an expert had to be convinced by the sheer weight of it all.
And she doesn't ease you into it in the book. Right from the start, there's that striking anecdote, almost gut-wrenching. She introduces Jarvis Cotton and his family, traces 5 generations. 5 generations legally barred from voting. That's not just a detail, is it? It's her way of showing right away.
Yeah.
Racial caste is not dead. It is alive and well in America. It makes that abstract idea of caste so painfully concrete.
Right from page 1.
Okay, so Alexander, she's a legal scholar. Trained to see patterns, connections. How does she use that skill? How does she connect today's systems to that deeper history of racial control in America?
Yeah, she connects the dots brilliantly. If we look at the bigger picture she paints, she meticulously traces this recurring historical pattern, argues that America has this long, continuous history of racial control systems. And each one, she says, emerged strategically, usually in response to challenges to white supremacy.
Okay, like what? Can you give some examples?
Sure. So first you had slavery, obviously fundamental. She shows how it replaced earlier labor systems, especially after things like Bacon's Rebellion. But by deliberately driving a wedge between poor whites and black people, it consolidated those racial hierarchies, for the elite. Then, Reconstruction ends. Federal troops pull out of the South, and suddenly Jim Crow laws pop up everywhere. And these weren't just about segregation science, right? It was a whole system of control. Right. Alexander points to specific things like vagrancy laws. 9 southern states adopted them after the Civil War.
Vagrancy laws, what did they do?
They essentially made it a crime for black people not to work, often forced them into terrible labor situations, almost like slavery again. And they were applied selectively, brutally, just to keep black people as this marginalized, controlled labor force. And then finally, she argues, the civil rights movement dismantles Jim Crow. So what emerges as the new mechanism, the new supposedly colorblind one, the war on drugs, it's like this cycle, adapting each time.
That sounds, like a really disturbing cycle. The method changes, but the goal stays the same. Racial control.
Yeah.
So if the war on drugs is this new mechanism, how does she say it became the engine of mass incarceration? Because I think for a lot of us, it felt like it was presented as, a necessary response to a drug crisis.
Right. And Alexander tackles that head on. She's very clear. She argues the war on drugs was absolutely the primary driver of mass incarceration. But here's the provocative part. She emphasizes it was not launched because drug use was suddenly spiking or because the public was demanding it. She explicitly states, and this is crucial, the drug war was launched in 1982 before crack became an issue in the media or a crisis in poor black neighborhoods.
Wow, 1982, before crack hit the media. That timing is significant.
It's critical to her argument. She suggests it was more of a strategic political move, leveraging public anxiety about crime, which was often racialized, to basically reestablish control after the civil rights wins. It created this legal framework, this social justification to manage and contain populations seen as a threat.
Okay, so if it was strategically launched, how does this war actually work on the ground? What are the practical mechanisms she points to, the things that create this new racial caste?
She lays out 3 really insidious stages. They work together. First, there's targeted enforcement. Federal money, particularly from things like the Byrne Grant Program, basically paid local police departments to make more drug arrests. Big incentives.
Follow the money.
Exactly. And that financial push led directly to practices like racial profiling, aggressive stop and frisk, coercive consent searches, and these overwhelmingly hit Black and Latino communities. What's critical, she shows, is this happens even though evidence shows equal or sometimes even higher drug use in white communities. So the system isn't really designed to fight drugs everywhere. It's designed to target specific groups. Then you get to stage 2, harsh sentencing. This is where you see huge disparities inside the justice system itself. Alexander says, quote, Blacks are routinely subject to police practices that would be deemed unconscionable if applied to middle-class whites. And this carries through the courts. You have vast prosecutorial discretion. Prosecutors deciding who gets charged with what, offering plea deals, often way harsher for people of color.
Right. And inadequate defense, too, I imagine.
Definitely. Often terrible legal defense for poor defendants leads to pressure to just plead guilty, even if innocent. And then judges handing down much longer sentences for defendants of color compared to white defendants for the very same crimes. And finally, stage 3. She calls it the cruel hand. It's the permanent legal discrimination after conviction. And this is made worse, she argues, by Supreme Court decisions, like McCleskey v. Kemp. That case made it almost impossible to prove racial discrimination in the system, even with overwhelming statistics showing bias.
How so? How did it make it impossible?
Basically, you can show the system as a whole is biased, the stats can be clear, but you can't use that general evidence to challenge your specific conviction, unless you can prove someone intended to discriminate against you personally in your case, which is, well, an incredibly high bar, almost insurmountable.
And these consequences, this cruel hand, they go way beyond just prison time, right? It's about this lifetime of diminished citizenship, as you said. What does that actually look like?
Yeah, it's devastating. She argues a conviction basically creates a permanent underclass, a kind of civic death. Alexander states it plainly. Today, it is perfectly legal to discriminate against criminals in nearly all the ways that it was once legal to discriminate against African Americans. Think about that. It means legal discrimination in jobs often blocked forever, especially licensed work. Housing. Huge barriers. Excluded from public housing, denied rentals. Education. Federal student aid severely restricted, public benefits like food stamps often denied, and maybe most profoundly, losing the right to vote, often permanently. It's this whole web designed to keep people locked into second-class status.
That comparison, discriminating against criminals like you could discriminate against African Americans under Jim Crow.
Yeah.
That's incredibly stark. Did you make other historical comparisons to really drive home how severe this is?
Oh, absolutely. And it's maybe the most powerful, most unsettling one in the entire book. Alexander argues, quote, a freed criminal today has fewer rights than a freed slave in Mississippi at the end of the Civil War.
Wow. Just let that sink in.
Right. She's directly comparing the post-prison reality today to the post-slavery reality then, highlighting how both groups, centuries apart, were deliberately stripped of fundamental rights and opportunities, pushed into the similar state of permanent marginalization. It hammers home her thesis. The mechanisms change, sure, but the result, that social and economic lockdown for certain groups, eerily similar. It creates this caste that's incredibly hard to escape.
It's so clear she's pushing back against some really deeply held beliefs about American progress. What does she say about that idea of a post-racial society?
Yeah.
You know, the idea that we're past all that. And about colorblindness.
Yeah, that's a huge theme, especially given the time she was writing right after Obama's election. She directly challenges that triumphant narrative, the idea that America had made huge progress, moved beyond its racist past. She calls it, quote, the triumphant notion of post-racialism is, in my view, nothing more than fiction. a type of Orwellian doublespeak.
Orwellian doublespeak. How so?
Because she argues that colorblindness, the idea of not seeing race, doesn't end racism. It just makes it invisible and therefore unchallengeable. By saying we don't see color, the system uses neutral-sounding language, neutral laws. But these laws still produce massively disparate racial outcomes. It's doublespeak because we're celebrating equality on one hand, while the system hides the discrimination in plain sight on the other, makes it harder to name, harder to fight. It's a really sophisticated kind of racism. Operates without the old KKK hoods or explicit signs, but the impact is just as devastating.
Okay, as we're sort of sitting with these really challenging truths about how these systems might work, just a reminder that our YouTube channel, Mindful Moments, offers AI book analysis like this, really designed to help you reflect and think rationally. We really believe these deep dives help synthesize complex ideas, so check that out. All right, so if this system is so pervasive, so embedded, and if colorblindness is actually part of the problem, how does Alexander suggest we dismantle this new Jim Crow? What are her solutions? Are they different from, say, traditional civil rights tactics?
Yeah. They have to be different, she argues. It requires way more than just traditional civil rights strategies, focusing on equal opportunity, ending overt discrimination. Those things are important, necessary even, but they're not enough here. She says it demands a fundamental shift, a really radical shift in how we, as Americans, think about race, crime, justice. It's not about just tweaking the existing system. The whole framework, the whole way we understand the problem needs to change. We have to recognize mass incarceration itself as a system of racial control.
Okay, a fundamental shift. What kind of movement does she think can achieve that?
She calls for a new kind of movement, one that explicitly names mass incarceration as a racial justice issue, not just a criminal justice one. And this movement, she argues, has to build really broad coalitions across racial lines, recognizing that while the impact is heavily racialized, the underlying systemic problems affect lots of people. She says, quote, "We need a radical restructuring of our economy and our society in order to ensure that poor people of all colors gain equal access to opportunity, jobs, housing, and healthcare."
So it's much broader than just prison reform.
Much broader. It means shifting resources away from policing and prisons and putting them into community development, education, social services, mental health care. It means tackling things like predatory lending, wealth inequality, ensuring basic needs are met, basically removing the conditions that make communities vulnerable to the criminal justice system in the first place.
That definitely brings in a huge economic dimension. Beyond just the courts and cops, how does Alexander connect mass incarceration to those broader economic systems, like the prison industrial complex or racial capitalism?
Yeah, she definitely goes there. She talks about how mass incarceration serves the interest of the prison industrial complex. And that's not just a catchphrase for her. She details how private companies profit at every stage, building prisons, running them, providing food, healthcare, phone calls, even using prisoner labor.
Yeah.
This creates this powerful economic engine that needs more arrests, longer sentences. It needs bodies in cages to keep profits flowing. It's not just about safety.
Right. It creates its own demand.
Exactly. And she connects it to broader systems of what scholars call racial capitalism, where creating this permanent underclass through incarceration actually provides a pool of cheap, exploitable labor for certain industries after release. Or even inside prisons. It helps maintain economic hierarchies, concentrates wealth, all while hiding behind the language of crime control and personal responsibility.
And to sort of peel back those layers to expose how these neutral-seeming systems work, what's the theoretical tool she's using? What's the framework?
She draws heavily on critical race theory, which is, a framework from legal studies and academia. It basically examines how race and racism have fundamentally shaped legal systems and social structures throughout history. She uses it to show how laws and policies that look neutral, that don't even mention race, can still perpetuate racial subordination, maintain that racial hierarchy. It helps her unpack how the rhetoric of individual responsibility, blaming people for their situation, often just masks or justifies systemic discrimination. It shifts the focus from blaming individuals' bad choices to seeing the deeply embedded structural biases that disadvantage whole communities. It shows how people get caught in this racially structured system.
The new Jim Crow clearly struck a nerve. It's had such a massive, enduring impact since 2010. Can you tell us a bit about its legacy, its influence?
Oh, absolutely. The reception was huge. Critical acclaim, major awards. It won the 2011 NAACP Image Award for Nonfiction, the 2016 Heinz Award for Public Policy, lots of recognition, and it was on the New York Times bestseller list for nearly 250 weeks. which is just astonishing for a book like this. People like Cornel West called it the Bible of a social movement. That gives you a sense of its foundational role. Beyond that, it's been cited in court cases, used in countless college courses, community reading groups all over the country. It really became part of the conversation.
That's incredible reach. What about beyond academia and awards? How did it shape things on the ground, actual movements, initiatives?
Yeah, it really had a transformative effect on how people talked about criminal justice and race in America. It's credited with sparking, or at least fueling, a whole generation of criminal justice reform activists and organizations. Gave them a powerful framework. It helped inspire major initiatives like the Marshall Project, that great nonprofit newsroom covering criminal justice, and the Art for Justice Fund, that $100 million project focused on ending mass incarceration. Adam Schatz, the essayist, he noted, "It is in no small part thanks to Alexander's account that civil rights organizations such as Black Lives Matter have focused so much of their energy on the criminal justice system. It really provided this crucial lens for understanding the systemic nature of injustice in policing and prisons."
So if you had to boil it down, what's the core lasting legacy of the new Jim Crow for anyone trying to get a handle on contemporary America?
I think its most lasting contribution, really, is how it successfully reframed mass incarceration. It took it from being seen primarily as just a criminal justice issue, about crime rates and punishment, and reframed it as an undeniable civil rights issue, a racial justice issue, by drawing those explicit, really compelling lines between today's practices and those older systems of racial control. Alexander fundamentally changed how we understand the link between race and criminal justice in America today. Like Bill Gates said, it gives you an eye-opening look into how the criminal justice system unfairly targets communities of color. It forces you to confront that uncomfortable truth about where we really are on equality.
Which leads to a final thought, maybe preview them all over. If systems of racial control can just transform like this, reappear disguised in the language of equality, the language of progress, what other deeply ingrained biases might be silently shaping our society right now, hidden in plain sight?
It's a heavy question. But the shift in perspective this book offers is just profound. It really forces us to grapple with these uncomfortable truths about justice, equality in America. Makes it essential reading, really, for anyone who wants to understand the complexities of our society and that persistent shadow of racial caste.
Absolutely. And to dive even deeper into Michelle Alexander's powerful work, you can click the link on screen for our in-depth book analysis. We really encourage you to subscribe, share this conversation if you found it valuable, and maybe purchase this vital book using the link we've provided. And most importantly, always think critically about the information you encounter.
Yeah, definitely. And remember to check out Mindful Moments on our YouTube channel for more AI book analysis like this designed to spark reflection and rational thought. And explore our podcasts, too, for more deep dives into the critical ideas shaping our world.